William Wallace, the legend, the lies, the legacy. What if I told you that a single horse's misstep plunged an entire kingdom into chaos? That a blind poet shaped the legend of a man whose real name we're not even sure about? That a rebel once wore his enemy's skin as a belt and was executed on a day honoring the patron saint of butchers? How did William Wallace go from outlaw to guardian of Scotland? Why did France arrest him, then send him to Rome with a royal letter? What secrets lie in a manuscript that may have burned centuries ago? This isn't just history, it's a medieval thriller packed with betrayal, bloodshed, and bagpipes. So grab your sword, tighten your kilt, and stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll never see Braveheart the same way again. Once upon a time in the misty glens of 13th century Scotland, a boy king named Alexander III ruled the land. Crowned at the tender age of 8, because nothing says stable government like a third grader with a scepter. Alexander somehow survived the Game of Thrones-style power grabs of his regents and grew into a surprisingly competent monarch. By the time he hit 21, Alexander was reclaiming islands from Norway like a medieval real estate mogul and ushering in a golden age of peace, trade, and abbey building. Scotland was thriving, and even England was playing nice. But fate, as it often does, had a banana peel waiting. In 1286, Alexander, eager to visit his pregnant second wife Yolande, galloped off into a stormy night. Somewhere near Petticoat, his horse slipped on a cliffside path. The king was found dead the next day, and with him died Scotland's political stability. Enter Margaret, the Maid of Norway, Alexander's granddaughter and heir. She was 8, Norwegian, and seasick. Tragically, she died en route to Scotland in 1290, leaving the throne emptier than a Highland pub on tax day. With no clear heir, Scotland's nobles did what any medieval nation would do in a crisis. They asked England for help. Enter Edward I, also known as Longshanks, a man whose idea of diplomacy was, "I'll help you govern yourselves under me." Edward installed John Balliol as a puppet king, then yanked his strings so hard they snapped. By 1296, Edward had invaded. Balliol was deposed, and Scotland was under English occupation. Cue the bagpipes of rebellion. Now into this chaos stepped William Wallace, a man so shrouded in mystery that historians still argue over his birthplace. Was it Ellerslie? Narnia? No one knows. What we do know is that he wasn't a noble, but he wasn't a peasant either. His father was a knight, and young William was educated, multilingual, and possibly a bit stabby. Before he became Scotland's poster boy for freedom, Wallace may have been more outlaw than hero. One tale says he killed an English constable's son in Dundee for insulting him. Another claims he murdered English soldiers over a fishing dispute. Either way, by 1297, Wallace had graduated from local nuisance to national insurgent. Most of what we know about Wallace comes from Blind Harry, a 15th century poet who wrote an epic called The Wallace, 150 years after Wallace's death. Harry claimed he based it on a lost biography by a monk named John, or maybe Arnold Blair. The manuscript, possibly destroyed in a fire, or maybe it never existed. Or maybe it's buried under a unicorn stable, who knows? Was Wallace's biography among the Cottonian manuscripts lost to fire? Who knows? Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was being used as a coaster for medieval mead and got tossed into the fire by a drunken monk named Kevin. What we do know is this: no one can find it. And that means our best source on William Wallace is a blind poet named, wait for it, Blind Harry. Yes, that's right, a man who couldn't see, writing about a man he never met, based on a manuscript that may or may not have existed, written by a monk who may or may not have been named John or Arnold. Clear as mud, right? Blind Harry's epic poem The Wallace is a rousing, blood-pumping, kilt-flapping tale of rebellion and heroism, but it's also about as historically accurate as a pirate movie set in space. One of his first claims, that Wallace was the son of Malcolm Wallace. Dramatic music cue. Wrong. Love epic tales like this? Hit subscribe now and join the rebellion. More legends await. In 1297, Wallace himself wrote a letter to the mayors of Lübeck and Hamburg. Yes, the man had international pen pals, and he signed it with a seal that showed a hand pulling back a bowstring and the Latin words, Wilhelmus filius Alani, William, son of Alan. Boom, take that, Blind Harry. Now, let's talk about the tragic tale of Lady Marian, Wallace's supposed wife. According to legend, Wallace was visiting her and their daughter when English soldiers burst in like medieval SWAT. He escaped, she didn't. She was executed, and Wallace's heart turned to fire and vengeance. Cue the violins, cue the slow-motion sword montage. But did it happen? Maybe, maybe not. Some historians say Marion never existed, others say she was real, but not Wallace's wife. And some say Blind Harry made her up for dramatic flair, because what's a hero without a tragic love story, right? Meanwhile, back in the royal mess that was Scotland, the nobles had asked Edward I of England to pick a king. Because, asking your ambitious neighbor to choose your ruler is always a great idea. Edward picked John Balliol, a man with the spine of a jellyfish and the political savvy of a turnip. Balliol was supposed to be Edward's puppet, but in 1295 he shocked everyone by allying with France, England's mortal enemy. Edward's response? Full-scale invasion mode. Activated. He dethroned Balliol, imprisoned nobles, and forced Scottish soldiers to fight for England. It was like asking someone to clean your house and then making them scrub your neighbor's toilet too. The town of Lanark. No one knows exactly why Wallace chose this spot, but what we do know is this. He killed the English sheriff and most of his men. It was a medieval mic drop. The rebellion had begun. From there, Wallace and his ragtag band of rebels went full guerrilla mode, hitting Dundee, Ancram, and Scone like a whirlwind of angry bagpipes. Other uprisings flared up, led by Andrew Murray and the MacDougall clan. Scotland was on fire, metaphorically and probably literally. September 11th, 1297. The Battle of Stirling Bridge. The English, led by the Earl of Surrey, tried to cross a narrow bridge over the River Forth. Wallace, perched on high ground like a hawk with a grudge, waited. He let half the English cavalry cross. Then, struck like lightning, his spearmen charged, pinning the English against the river. It was a massacre. The bridge became a bottleneck of doom. The English army crumbled. And then came the pièce de résistance. Hugh de Cressingham, the hated English treasurer, was captured and flayed. Some say alive, some say dead. Either way, Wallace allegedly made a belt out of his skin. A belt out of human skin. That's not just rebellion. That's a fashion statement. Wallace was hailed as a hero. At Kirk of the Forest he was named Guardian of Scotland, and for a brief shining moment he stood at the pinnacle of Scottish resistance. But Edward I wasn't done. Oh no. In 1298 he returned with a vengeance and longbows. At the Battle of Falkirk, Wallace's schiltrons, tight circles of spearmen, were no match for the English archers. The arrows rained down like death confetti. Wallace's army was shattered. He vanished from the spotlight, wounded in body and spirit. The rebellion would continue, but Wallace's star had begun to fade. The year is 1298. Scotland is still reeling from the glorious triumph at Stirling Bridge and the brutal defeat at Falkirk. Our hero, William Wallace, the man who had once sent letters to European leaders declaring Scotland's independence with the swagger of a medieval James Bond, has vanished from the battlefield. Why? Because Wallace, ever the realist beneath the war paint, knew the tides had turned. He resigned as Guardian of Scotland. No dramatic speech, no farewell parade, just a quiet exit stage left. The man who had once led armies now slipped into the shadows. What does a rebel do when his homeland is overrun and his title stripped? He goes on a medieval diplomatic tour, of course. First stop, Norway, or maybe France, or possibly both. The records are fuzzier than a Highland sheep in winter. But what we do know is that Wallace was trying to rally support for Scotland's cause. He wanted allies, he wanted reinforcements, he wanted anyone to tell Edward I to shove it. But fate had other plans. Wallace arrived in France as Edward I was marrying Margaret, sister to Philip IV of France. The timing? Disastrous. The marriage was a love fest, and Philip IV was suddenly BFFs with Edward. So when Wallace showed up at the French court, expecting a warm welcome and a goblet of wine, he got arrested. Yes, the hero of Scotland was tossed in a French dungeon like a common pickpocket. Philip offered to hand him over to England, but Edward, in a move that was either strategic or just plain weird, said, "Nah, just keep him there." For safekeeping? Maybe. Or maybe Edward was just playing 4D chess with human lives. But wait, the plot thickens. Wallace somehow charmed his way back into Philip's good graces. Released from custody, he planned to head to Rome to plead his case before the Pope himself. And in 2011, Yes, 7 centuries later, a letter surfaced in the National Archives in London. It was a safe conduct letter from Philip IV to the Pope, vouching for Wallace's honor and asking His Holiness to hear him out. Was Wallace carrying this letter when he was arrested in 1305? Maybe. Or maybe it was intercepted by spies. Or maybe it was delivered by a carrier pigeon with a flair for espionage. No one knows. The letter now lives in the National Records of Scotland, and it's one of only 2 surviving documents tied directly to Wallace. The other? His letter to Lubeck. That's it. No diaries, no selfies, just 2 scraps of parchment and a mountain of legend. By 1303, Wallace was back in Scotland, popping up in skirmishes like a ghost with a grudge. Edward I reportedly offered him clemency, multiple times. Wallace's response? Allegedly a resounding no thanks. But those accounts come from English sources, so grain of salt, anyone? Edward had had enough. He declared Wallace a traitor and outlaw. That meant anyone could kill him, no trial, no questions asked. Helping him? Treason. Harboring him? Treason. Giving him directions to the nearest pub? Treason. And then came the ultimate betrayal. Wallace was captured by a fellow Scotsman, Sir John Menteith. Oof. That one stung. August 23, 1305, Smithfield, London. Wallace was dragged through the streets by horses, punishment for treason. Then he was hanged until almost dead, punishment for murder and robbery. But they weren't done. Next came the punishment for desecrating churches, castration and disembowelment, with his organs burned before his eyes. Was he still alive? Sources say, probably. Finally, for being an outlaw, he was beheaded. His head was mounted on London Bridge and his body was quartered, sent to Newcastle, Berwick, Perth, and Stirling as a warning. And just to add a twisted cherry on top, the execution kicked off the Bartholomew Fair, a massive celebration honoring St. Bartholomew, patron saint of butchers and tanners. Irony level maximum. St. Bartholomew was skinned and beheaded. Wallace allegedly skinned Hugh de Cressingham and wore his hide as a belt. Coincidence? Maybe. Symbolic? Definitely. Wallace died a brutal death, but his legend only grew. Like St. Bartholomew, he became a martyr, not just for Scotland, but for the idea of freedom itself. He may have been betrayed, tortured, and scattered to the winds, but his cry, freedom, still echoes through the glens, the lochs, and the hearts of every rebel with a cause. That's the end of this epic tale, but the legend lives on. If you love this journey through history, hit subscribe, drop a like, and share with your clan. More battles, betrayals, and bold heroes await. See you in the next one.